the written word was very important because it was, you got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with.
What if the Bible you grew up reading was missing more than 20 books that were carefully preserved somewhere else in the world for over 1,000 years? Welcome back. Today we are stepping into something genuinely fascinating. We are talking about Mel Gibson, one of Hollywood's most fearless filmmakers, the Ethiopian Bible.
So as a child, you learn these things and you accept them on faith. And I still have that faith, but as I got older, I came to it through intellect and through reading.
One of the oldest and most complete Christian canons on the planet, and a portrait of Jesus that most of the Western world has simply never encountered. This is not a conspiracy. This is history, rich, layered, and jaw-dropping history. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because we cover the stories that most channels skip. Now, let us get into it. Who is Mel Gibson and why does his voice carry weight here? Before diving into the Ethiopian Bible, it is important to understand why Mel Gibson's perspective holds significance in this discussion. He is not a traditional theologian or academic, but his work has placed him deeply within the world of biblical storytelling. When he created The Passion of the Christ in 2004, he invested more than money. He committed years of research, personal risk, and creative focus to bring the story to life. The film's massive global success, earning hundreds of millions against a modest budget, showed that his approach resonated far beyond Hollywood. What sets Gibson apart is the seriousness with which he approaches Scripture. He chose to film in ancient languages like Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, and collaborated with scholars and historians to ensure authenticity. Now, with his upcoming sequel, The Resurrection of Christ, he is expanding his exploration into deeper, more complex biblical themes. When he raises questions about missing teachings or alternative scriptural traditions like the Ethiopian Bible, it carries weight because it comes from years of immersion, not casual speculation. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian institutions on earth. To understand the importance of the Ethiopian Bible, you first need to look at the church that preserved it. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church traces its official origins to around 330 AD, when King Ezana of Aksum embraced Christianity, making it one of the earliest state-supported Christian traditions. In many ways, it predates much of what later became mainstream European Christianity, giving it a unique place in religious history. What makes this church especially fascinating is its independence and continuity. While much of the Christian world experienced centuries of debates, councils, and political influence, Ethiopia remained largely isolated due to its geography. This separation allowed it to preserve traditions and scriptures without external pressure to conform. Today, with tens of millions of followers, it stands not as a fringe belief system, but as one of the oldest and most enduring Christian institutions, quietly maintaining a version of the Bible that is far broader than what most of the Western world recognizes. The Bible, with 81 books here, is the number that stops most people cold. The Protestant Bible has 66 books. The Catholic Bible has 73. The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible has 81 canonical books. That is 46 books in the Old Testament and 35 books in the New Testament, 15 more books than the Protestant canon. Now, some online sources throw around numbers like 88 or even higher, and that comes from counting slightly different versions of the Ethiopian canon or including texts considered supplementary. The officially recognized canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church sits at 81 books. That is the number the church itself uses, and it is well documented. The books that make the Ethiopian Bible unique compared to the Western canon include the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Paralipomena of Jeremiah, and the Book of the Covenant, among others. Some of these texts are known to scholars but are classified as apocryphal or pseudepigraphical in Western Christianity, meaning they are considered outside the official Bible. In Ethiopia, they are not outside anything, they are central. What is worth understanding is that many of the early church fathers in the West actually quoted from books like Enoch and Jubilees. These were not secret or obscure texts in the first few centuries of Christianity. They circulated widely. The narrowing of the canon happened over time through a series of councils and decisions that Ethiopia simply did not participate in. So the Ethiopian Church did not add these books later. In a real sense, it never took them out. The Book of Enoch and what it says. Of all the books in the Ethiopian Bible that are absent from the Western canon, the Book of Enoch is probably the most talked about, and for good reason. This text is ancient. It is referenced in the New Testament book of Jude. It was quoted extensively by early Christian writers, and it contains ideas about angels, cosmic judgment, and the figure of the Son of Man that feel remarkably connected to what we read in the Gospels. The book of Enoch describes a figure called the Son of Man who will preside over the judgment of fallen angels and the wicked. This language, Son of Man, is one of the most frequent ways Jesus refers to himself in the Gospels. Scholars have long debated whether Jesus was drawing on the Enochic tradition when he used that title. If he was, then understanding Enoch gives you a deeper framework for understanding what Jesus was actually communicating when he called himself by that name. The book also describes a cosmic architecture. There are multiple heavens in this framework. Angels and fallen angels occupy different realms. Judgment happens on a grand, universal scale. This kind of imagery does not fit neatly into the tidy, pastoral picture of Christianity that most Western churchgoers grew up with. But it fits very naturally alongside books like Daniel and Revelation, which have always been in the Western canon. Enoch reads like the backstory to those apocalyptic writings. Now here is the interesting gossip around all of this. Some people who follow Gibson's production closely have noticed that his description of the resurrection sequel, which he has called an acid trip, involving the fall of angels, other realms, and a non-linear timeline, sounds a lot like what you find in Enoch and the Ascension of Isaiah. Is he drawing directly from those texts? He has not confirmed it publicly in specific terms. But the thematic overlap is something fans and researchers have been pointing at with a lot of enthusiasm. Could the resurrection of Christ be the first major film to bring the Enochic vision of Jesus to a global audience? That is a question worth sitting with. The Book of Jubilees, another hidden jewel. The Book of Jubilees is another text that sits comfortably in the Ethiopian canon but is rarely discussed in Western churches. It is sometimes called the Little Genesis because it retells the stories of Genesis and parts of Exodus in a highly detailed way, adding information about timelines, festivals, and the spiritual significance of events that the standard Genesis account leaves out. In Jubilees, time itself is structured in Jubilee periods of 49 years, and history is laid out in this cosmic timeline. There is a strong sense in this book that everything happening in human history is connected to a larger divine plan operating across centuries. The angels in Jubilees are not background figures. They are active participants in human events, guiding, warning, and sometimes intervening directly. This creates a vision of reality that is richly layered, where the spiritual and physical worlds are constantly interacting. For Ethiopian Christians, Jubilees has been a canonical scripture for well over 1,000 years. It shapes how they understand the relationship between the Old Testament law and the broader cosmic story of creation and redemption. It is read and studied in Ethiopian monasteries and churches as authoritative scripture, not as a curiosity or a historical artifact. From a scholarly perspective, fragments of Jubilees were also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means this text was valued by at least some Jewish communities in the centuries just before and during the time of Jesus. That alone is historically significant. It was not a fringe document. It was a living text inside the world that Jesus himself inhabited. The Ascension of Isaiah, a cosmic journey. The Ascension of Isaiah is a text that describes the prophet Isaiah being taken on a visionary journey through the seven heavens. It is extraordinary reading even by modern standards. In this vision, Isaiah sees the heavens in layers, each one more glorious than the last, and he sees Christ moving through these heavens in a kind of disguised descent toward earth for the incarnation. What is remarkable about the Ascension of Isaiah is how it frames the story of Jesus. In this text, Christ is not simply born in Bethlehem as a human baby. The cosmic story begins much earlier in the heavenly realms, and Christ passes through each layer of the heavenly hierarchy before arriving in the physical world. This is a vision of the Incarnation as an enormous cosmic event rather than just a historical one. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved this text as canonical scripture. It is read and understood as genuinely inspired writing. And here is where people who are watching Gibson closely start connecting dots. Gibson has said publicly on multiple occasions that his resurrection sequel cannot follow a straight timeline because the story is happening across realms at once. He has said it starts in another place entirely. In another realm, the ascension of Isaiah describes exactly that kind of multi-realm narrative structure for the story of Christ. Is Gibson adapting the ascension of Isaiah? Is he inspired by it? Is the overlap just a coincidence? We cannot say for certain, and we should be careful about claiming more than the evidence supports. But the conversation among fans of both Gibson and early Christian texts is lively, and the overlap in imagery and narrative structure is genuinely striking. That is worth paying attention to. The Book of the Covenant and the Hidden 40 Days. One of the lesser-known yet fascinating texts in the Ethiopian Bible is the Book of the Covenant, which is believed to contain teachings given by Jesus to his disciples after the resurrection. While the four Gospels briefly mention this period, they do not explore it in depth. In contrast, this text expands on those 40 days, presenting additional teachings and moments that are considered authoritative within the Ethiopian tradition and have been preserved for centuries. As part of their canon, from a Western scholarly perspective, this text is generally viewed as a later composition rather than a direct record of Jesus' teachings. However, within the Ethiopian Church, its authority is rooted in long-standing tradition rather than modern academic debate. The larger idea being highlighted is that the period between the resurrection and ascension may hold far more depth than commonly explored. Whether through ancient texts or modern interpretations, it raises the possibility that this chapter of biblical history is richer and more layered than many realize. How the Western canon was formed and why books were left out. The formation of the biblical canon was not a single, clear-cut event, but a gradual and often complex process that unfolded over centuries. Different regions and church communities held varying views on which texts should be considered scripture, leading to debates, councils, and evolving theological priorities. Contrary to popular belief, no single moment finalized the Bible as it exists today. Instead, it emerged through a long period of discussion and refinement. While the Council of Nicaea is often mistakenly associated with deciding the canon, its primary focus was theological, particularly on the nature of Christ. The actual development of the canon continued long after, with influential figures proposing lists that slowly shaped what became widely accepted in the West. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian Church followed its own path, preserving a broader collection of texts due to its relative isolation. This difference does not necessarily determine correctness, but it does reveal that early Christianity was more diverse in its scriptures and traditions than many people assume. The monasteries guarding these texts. One of the most compelling parts of the Ethiopian Bible story is where these ancient texts have been preserved. Across Ethiopia, remote mountain monasteries, some carved into cliffs and reachable only by rope or narrow paths, have served as quiet guardians of sacred manuscripts for centuries. Places like Debre Damo, which has stood since the 6th century, were never easily accessible, and that isolation became a powerful form of protection for the texts housed within them. Inside these monasteries, generations of monks carefully copied scriptures by hand in the Ge'ez language, preserving a literary tradition that has remained alive for centuries. Their work was not driven by secrecy, but by devotion and continuity, passing down what they received with discipline and care. Today, however, these manuscripts face real danger due to regional conflicts, with some already lost or damaged. Efforts to digitize and preserve what remains are ongoing, but the urgency to protect this heritage has never been greater. How Jesus is portrayed differently in the Ethiopian tradition. At the center of this discussion is how the Ethiopian tradition presents Jesus in a way that feels distinct from familiar Western imagery. In Ethiopian art, Christ is depicted with darker skin, striking features, and an unmistakable sense of authority that feels both human and cosmic. This portrayal reflects a deeper theological emphasis. presenting Jesus not only as a compassionate figure, but as a powerful universal presence that transcends ordinary human boundaries. This perspective is closely tied to the concept of tewahedo, meaning unity, which expresses the belief that Jesus' divine and human natures are fully united as one. This differs slightly from Western interpretations and shapes how the resurrection itself is understood, not just as a historical moment, but as a cosmic event impacting all of existence. This broader, multidimensional view aligns closely with modern interpretations like Mel Gibson's upcoming sequel, which explores the story across multiple realms, echoing ideas long present in Ethiopian Christian thought. Mel Gibson's resurrection sequel, What We Actually Know. When it comes to Mel Gibson's upcoming film, The Resurrection of Christ, it is important to separate verified details from assumptions. What is confirmed is that filming began in October 2025 at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, alongside additional locations in southern Italy such as Matera and Brindisi. The project is being released in 2 parts through Lionsgate, with Part 1 set for March 26, 2027, and Part 2 for May 6, 2027. With a budget of $100 million and a new lead actor, Jaakko Otonen, the film is already positioned as a major cinematic undertaking. Gibson has also shared that the story will explore themes like the fall of angels and events across multiple realms, describing it as non-linear and visually intense. However, what remains unconfirmed is any direct link between the film and the Ethiopian Bible. While many have drawn connections based on thematic similarities, these remain interpretations rather than verified facts. Still, reports suggest Gibson has been studying early Christian texts, which leaves room for influence without clear confirmation. What scholars and theologians say. From a scholarly perspective, the Ethiopian Bible is widely recognized as both ancient and authentic within its own tradition. Experts agree that its texts were part of early Christian communities and that differences between canons developed over time through historical processes. Rather than being fabricated or hidden, the Ethiopian canon reflects a separate but legitimate path in the evolution of Christian scripture. Where scholars urge caution is in response to claims that certain texts were deliberately suppressed to control religious narratives. The reality is far more nuanced, shaped by debates over theology, authorship, and consistency across teachings. Some scholars see Ethiopian texts as enriching existing theology with deeper symbolic and cosmic elements, while others view them as valuable but non-canonical writings. Despite differing opinions, there is broad agreement that the Ethiopian biblical tradition is deeply significant and deserves far more attention than it has received in mainstream discourse. How to read the Ethiopian Bible yourself. If this has sparked your curiosity, which it absolutely should, there are several ways you can actually read the Ethiopian biblical text yourself. The Book of Enoch is widely available in English translation and is one of the most accessible of the Ethiopian canon's distinctive texts. R.H. Charles produced a scholarly translation that is freely available online and in print. Reading Enoch is a genuinely mind-expanding experience if you have any interest in early Jewish and Christian thought. The Book of Jubilees is also available in English translation. You can find it through the same R.H. Charles scholarly editions, and it is readable in a single sitting if you have a free afternoon. For the full Ethiopian Bible in English, there are now several editions available through Amazon and major booksellers. Scholars note that the quality and accuracy of these translations vary. So if you want something reliable, look for editions that credit a named translator with academic credentials rather than anonymous compilations. For free online resources, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's official website at ethiopianorthodox.org provides information about their canonical texts. The Internet Sacred Text Archive at sacred-texts.com has free English translations of Enoch, Jubilees, and other texts from the wider early Christian and Jewish tradition. Mel Gibson is creating a cosmic multi-realm resurrection film that some link to the Ethiopian biblical tradition. This ancient canon, preserved for centuries, includes texts like Enoch and Jubilees, offering a more expansive view of Jesus. Whether directly connected or not, it highlights the depth and diversity within Christian history. Now we want to hear from you after everything you have just learned. Does knowing that a broader version of the Bible has been preserved in Ethiopia for over 1,000 years change how you think about the Jesus you thought you knew? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.